sold the idea that financial independence is all about some number on your account statement, or even worse, that you don't qualify because of where you started out. That's just not true. It's not about some well-kept secret of the wealthy. It's about finding the right information and knowing how to apply it. On the Get Ready for the Future show, we're answering your questions so you can start making real financial change today. The journey to true financial independence begins right here, and it starts with you.
Coming to you from the 6th floor of 3 Financial Center in West Little Rock, Arkansas, this is the Get Ready for the Future show. Welcome aboard as we answer your questions about money, about investing, about retirement, whatever you have for us. We're here to answer those questions and help you begin or continue or reach true financial independence. That's why we exist at GenWealth Financial Advisors. Glad to have you along today. Scott Inman, along with GenWealth co-founder John Shrewsbury. Welcome aboard for more questions and answers today. We got some good questions today, John.
Good questions, deep questions.
Yeah, they're always deep.
They are.
Our listeners are thinking.
They are, and we've got some answers for you, so let's get after it.
All right, first up, it's Adrian from Little Rock. I've heard recently that inflation is cooling, but things feel really expensive. Can you explain the inflation numbers and how I can adjust to them? Great question here, Adrian. You know, inflation was the buzzword for all of 2021 into 2022, and it was pretty high. We've got a graphic to show you that here in just a minute. But, John, it has been cooling. But I think where people get a little off track on their thinking here is when you talk about an inflation rate cooling, that doesn't mean prices are going down.
Yeah, the inflation rate didn't go in reverse, didn't go negative. And that's what you would have to have if you were to see prices decrease. Prices don't decrease as a general rule. And frankly, if you study deflationary environments, you will figure out you probably don't want any of that either. So let's talk a little bit about what's happened here. So, Scott, very simply, if something costs $1 and it goes to $1.10, that's a 10% increase in inflation. Now, we haven't had a 10%, but we did have a 9% annualized increase in inflation back about a year or so ago. Now, what happens then? Well, if inflation goes down from 10% to 3%, that $1.10 product now is worth about, or is going to cost about $1.13 or so. So prices didn't go down, but inflation actually cooled, meaning that it went from 10% to 3%. It still went up. It just didn't go up as much. And so that's when you hear people on the news talk about inflation is cooling, it means the rate of growth is slowing down, not that inflation is going backwards. Now, in most cases, the only time you see inflation going in reverse or something decreasing in price is when there is a decrease in demand. But Scott, you know, there's still a lot of money out in the money supply, and the higher interest rates haven't really, had a major effect on that. And we are seeing that kind of cool the inflation rate, but it's not causing demand to go away. When demand goes away, that's when you have a recession.
Yeah, and, we've talked about this before, John, as the reason that inflation spiked in the first place was in the COVID pandemic. We had a shutdown, right? And we stopped making things. And then demand was really off the charts because people weren't able to buy things for a little while. And then when they were out there buying again, the production was not keeping up. So demand exceeded supply, and that's what caused inflation to spike. Otherwise, we could have been on this really more smooth path of inflation. But back to our earlier point, I think about my dad, and I've told this story before too, but my dad's 80 years old, and he loves to tell me about going to the movies when he was a teenager back in the 50s, okay?
Yep.
Sorry,
Yep.
Dad, I already said you were 80, so everybody knows how old you are. But he could go to the movies, buy a Coke and a popcorn for 35 cents. I mean, you think about that, right? But those days are never coming back. To our point,
right,
the inflation or prices are never going to come down. We've got a graphic showing the U.S. annual inflation rates just over the last decade. So take a look at this if you're watching online. U.S. annual inflation rates from 2014 through this year. And you see, we were, I would almost say, artificially low about 10 years ago, under 1% inflation. Now, that would be great, but every year prices have still gone up. Even though it was not very much in 2014, they were still going up. And then you see that spike as you get to 2021 and the post-COVID year of 7%, and it has been cooling to Adrian's point, down to 3% on average year to date through 2024. But when you think about the second part to his question, John, and he says, how can I adjust to them? You have to accept that fact first, that prices are always going to continue to go up during your lifetime.
Right.
So how do you deal with it? And I want to kind of take it from a couple of different places. But the first part here is in the now, and then the second part is in the future. That's how we'll take this question on.
Yeah, so in the now, let's talk a little bit about wage inflation, because I think that any talk about inflation is really only half the story unless you look and see what has happened with wages. So we've got another graphic that I think is really interesting when you look at the dynamic here. So you see early on in March of 2020, wages were staying way ahead of inflation. Inflation was maybe down around 0 or 1%, somewhere in that neighborhood. Wage inflation was around somewhere between 2.5% and 3%. Well, when COVID came into being, we saw inflation shoot up, and it outstripped the gains that were being happening that people were enjoying from their job pay increasing. And so you had this break where inflation got ahead of us. Now inflation has come down, and probably in the last, say, year or so, maybe a little bit longer than that, the rate of growth of inflation has been less than the rate of growth of income in the United States. And so when you compare that, you can see that we're still suffering that lag effect of those higher prices, and those prices are actually staying up and continuing to increase, although wages are not increasing as fast.
Yeah, so the point here for Adrian is, what can you do in the now? It's to work on that career, right? You cannot work at a job for 30 years and never get a raise. You're never going to keep up with inflation. So the point here is to either look for ways to advance in your current positions, or look for ways to get more educated and find a better career path that will lift that income and keep it ahead of inflation.
And let's not forget the gig economy is still alive and well out there, and you can make extra income. You just can't go spend it on frivolous things like you might have in the past and saying, hey, I want to fund some cool trips or something, so I'm going to go and get some extra income from some gig that I get. You can't do that, but you can be in the way of building that into your cash flow. Now, when you do that, then you have to also be thinking, okay, how can I lift myself, as you were saying, Scott, in my permanent job, so I may not any longer need that gig economy to bridge me? But that is a quick way that you can overcome this spike in inflation.
Yeah, and as a sidebar to that, you always hear us talk about margin here. That's the difference between your income and your expenses. Keeping that margin helps you deal with rising prices as well. So don't increase debt while you're trying to increase your income. And then to the second part of that, the later. So that's what you can do now, begin to work on now. But for the later, and you can begin to do this now, but it is for your preparations in retirement, and that's invest in asset classes that have historically outpaced inflation. That's where we can get, we've seen in August some serious market volatility. The market has dropped. It causes people to get a little fearful of staying invested. They might get too conservative, and the next thing you know, they've gone a decade of higher inflation rates without investing in something that's going to have long-term growth.
Yeah, and that long-term growth is what you have to stay ahead of inflation. Frankly, it's equities and it is real estate. Those are the two asset classes that have kept people ahead of inflation throughout history as a general rule. Nothing stays positive all the time. We saw real estate actually back up a little bit in value during the post-COVID period of time. So it's one of those things that you've got to be very careful in terms of how you think about that, because, Scott, you can get scared, as you mentioned, out of equities, and that can really be a situation that works against you, and now you're battling two things. things. One is the loss that you might have by being scared out of equities, and then secondly, the loss that you would have by not being able to keep up with inflation as a result of you being out of those equities.
Adrian, I hope that helped, and we thank you for sending in your question. We want to give you another free resource if you're looking for more information, and anyone listening or watching can do this too. Download our free guide called 7 Steps to Financial Independence. It is easy to do. All you have to do is text the word STEPS to 501-381-5228. Again, the number is 501-381-5228. Just text the word STEPS to download that free guide, 7 Steps to Financial Independence. You can also get it by visiting our website, getreadyforthefuture.com/steps. Time for our next question. Chris from Rogers. I'm nearing age 55, and I'm trying to decide, should I start paying down my mortgage more aggressively? If I do so, it would cut into my contributions into my Roth and HSA, but I've got about $850,000 saved. Should I pay down my mortgage in lieu of some retirement contributions? Great question here, Chris, and as you get closer to retirement, it's a pretty common one, and it is kind of an inflection point. Which way do we go here? Because both are great ideas, right? Both paying down your mortgage and getting rid of that. And generally speaking, we want our clients to be mortgage-free at retirement. The reason being, back to that income expenses question, right? The lower your expenses, if you have no mortgage payment, you're not going to need as much retirement income, which means you may not have to deplete your assets as quickly by making larger withdrawals from your retirement savings. So that's a great idea to have a debt-free retirement. But when deciding if you should pull back from contributions in order to do it, requires a little bit more strategic thinking.
Scott, I would want to know what Chris's interest rate on his mortgage is. I think that's critical. And then secondly, how long do you have to pay on that mortgage? Those two things really kind of come into play. Your goal, as you mentioned, is to be debt-free by the time you retire. And that's something that I think you want to definitely do. And if you're close, that's fine. It doesn't have to be, okay, I can't retire until I'm debt free or anything of that nature. But if you can do that around the time you retire, then what I would do is save the money. I would not worry if you're on track right now to have that mortgage paid off by the time you retire, then invest that money, save that money. Don't accelerate the mortgage. There's really no upside to it because likely you're not going to have enough time for that mortgage savings from the payment being vanquished on that mortgage to do any good as far as contributing to your retirement plan is concerned. There's not a lot of time for that money to grow. But I think that any time that you stop putting money toward your goal, then you can run the risk of interrupting your journey toward financial independence. The financial independence journey is one that really does require planning. It really does require consistency and time that your contributions work for you. And so I believe that being consistent with that makes more sense than paying off the mortgage. Now, if you have an abnormally high interest rate on your mortgage, then we could talk about that. We could see, okay, is there a delta here that makes some sense? But I think that that's a big issue. Now, all that's kind of general information, Scott.
Right.
But let's get specific because I think that when Chris looks at this, he has to ask himself several other questions in regard to not his mortgage, but his retirement.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Chris has given us some great data. We know he's near 55. We know he has $850,000 saved, but we don't know if your contributions are cut. What are your contributions and what impact is that going to have on what you wind up with at retirement? When are you going to retire? Are you 10 years away? Are you 15 years away? Are you going to retire in a year? We need to know those things too. But more importantly, and most importantly, I would say, is we need to have a discussion about retirement income. What are your income needs and what are your income wants whenever that projected retirement date arrives? And the reason that's the most important, John, is because then we know, is that $850,000 going to be enough in the future if he backs off of his contributions? What's he going to wind up with, potentially, based on some assumptions on rates of return and other things? But it will tell us what kind of income those assets will generate. And oh, by the way, we don't even know anything about his other income sources like Social Security.
Right. And I think that, I get it. A mortgage is one of those things you just want off your neck. You really would like for it to just go away. But here's the mathematical fact of it. If you're late in your mortgage journey in the 20 years, 30 years, whatever it is that you finance that mortgage, if it's going to be paid off relatively soon, take a look at your amortization schedule. What you will find is that you're paying very little in terms of dollars on interest, and you're paying a lot toward principal already. So accelerating that really doesn't save a tremendous amount if you're late in that mortgage journey. Scott, I think this really boils down to making a financial decision and a logical decision as opposed to making an emotional decision. Oftentimes, people make emotional decisions because it feels good. But I think sitting down with a financial advisor and actually going through the numbers and understanding the real consequence of whatever decision you make can give you some clarity about, okay, I understand, I see how this really ought to go. I think about this thought process, this mental thought process. Many, many, many years ago, I had a young lady who was my client, and she was contributing a pretty good amount of money per month to an account for herself. And she came in one day and she said, "Hey, I got a job as a teacher, and I need to buy a car, and I'm going to take that money and buy a car." And I simply showed her over the long term what that compound interest would do for her, and how much money she could likely have at retirement if she kept contributing to that account. And it just changed her mind because she understood the numbers. She understood the facts, as opposed to that emotion or that feeling that she didn't want to finance a car. She just was like, I'd just take that money and pay it off, and I'll start all over on my contributions. And we spent probably 20 minutes together and walked through that information with her, and she was able to make a logical decision as opposed to an emotional decision. And I think that oftentimes when people are thinking about this, that mortgage triggers a certain emotion. Yeah. I would really like to have this thing gone. It's just lingering on, and I can't make any progress without, whatever their thought process is. But if they will actually run the numbers, they will see what the benefit could be if they think otherwise.
Yeah, running the numbers is part of what the GenWealth Ready to Retire process can answer for folks. So, Chris, if you'd like to step into that, or anybody else wondering those same things, how do I balance paying off debt with making sure I've saved enough for retirement, and how do I know if I'm going to have the income I need in retirement and not run out of money? Step through the GenWealth Ready to Retire process with us. The first step is to just reach out. You can do it one of a couple of ways. You can just email us, send it to show@getreadyforthefuture.com, or you can call toll-free 866-653-PLAN. Again, the number 866-653-7526. That will get you in touch with a GenWealth financial advisor and set up a first appointment, which, by the way, is complimentary, no charge for having that discussion, and get some of those inputs that we needed from Chris that we didn't have, and begin building the complete financial plan that will show you if maybe you can pay off the mortgage and pull back on retirement contributions, or if you need to keep going full throttle at that. Congratulations, Chris. We're going to call this our question of the week, and for sending it in, we're going to send you a Get Ready for the Future Show tumbler right there. I model that every week. I'm getting used to, I don't have the Wheel of Fortune or the Price is Right thing going yet.
Yeah,
I'm not very. I can't really do it from behind the mic. I mean, in all honesty, I'm trying.
You're kind of constrained there.
Yeah.
I understand.
Yeah, it's not my fault, Chris. All you need to do is claim it, and claim it by sending us an email. Send it to show@getreadyforthefuture.com. And if you'd like to send in a question, maybe you will end up with a Get Ready for the Future Show tumbler. You can send those questions to us. It's really easy. I've given out that number. But I'm going to give it to you one more time, 501-381-5228. Just text your question, or you can call the number and leave a voicemail, and maybe we'll put your question on the air. Our next question this week is from Britt in Arkadelphia. I'm about to retire and wondering which accounts I should draw from first. I have a 401k, a Roth IRA, and some money in a brokerage account. Can you help me with that? Yes, we can, Brett. This is part of the Ready to Retire process, too. But let's kind of dig down on answering this question from Britt, because we really can I guess, tackle this from two sides, John. When you start thinking about which accounts to take retirement income first, I think the main reason people typically ask this question is they're worried about taxes.
Yeah, I think they are definitely worried about taxes, and the sequence in which you access your accounts can make a huge difference. We played around with this for years and looking at, okay, if I take it this way, this is the outcome. If I take it this way, this is the outcome. Well, if you have a focus on a long-term tax strategy, blending income from your various accounts can really make your total income less taxable if you think about it in the right way. So I think it could be done where you equally take some money from each account if each of those accounts are about the same size. But as a general rule, we never recommend liquidating equities on a systematic basis. So this is really important about how those accounts are invested as opposed to what type of accounts they are. The type of account really does foretell how much in tax you're going to pay on that account, but also you can really stump your toe if you're not careful. If you begin drawing money out of an equity-based account, you need to have those set up for income purposes.
Yeah, that's the key here, Britt. It's not is important on how that account is taxed that you are withdrawing from as it is how that account is invested. So let me say it one more time. If you're worried more about taxes than your investment strategy, you could have a big problem in retirement. Both are important, but let's walk through why taking money from an equity account could be a problem. It's called sequence of return risk. So when you think about pulling money out of an investment account that could be losing value as you do it. We've had some disruption just in the last month here, right, of the market going down. What if you're withdrawing money, selling those assets as they're going down? Not a good idea in retirement. You want to control when you sell your equity. So in the GenWealth Ready to Retire process, the investment strategy on this part is very clear. You want your equity investments, John, to be long-term investments, investments you're not going to plan to sell for a lengthy amount of time, 10 to 15 years, in fact. So the money that you're taking, whether it's in a 401k or it's in a Roth or it's in a brokerage account, it matters more how it's invested. And the money you're taking from today should be invested in a very conservative fashion with little to no risk to principal.
Absolutely. And there are some misplaced rules that I think we need to touch on, Scott, that really turn on how you would handle things like a Roth IRA. There is a school of thought that says leave that Roth IRA to grow for a long period of time, because the longer that Roth IRA grows, the more tax-free income that it theoretically will generate into the future. All that is true. However, there can be a benefit by taking some Roth money and blending it with your taxable money and your IRA money that would come from either a brokerage account or an IRA account, and actually lowering your overall taxable income during retirement. It can have an effect on your Social Security. It can have an effect on your overall tax bracket, and it can have an effect on in some cases, if you're a high income earner, that Roth IRA income could have an effect on whether you pay IRMA. Now, I've joked on this show before about my Aunt Irma. I had an aunt, lived in Kentucky. Her name was Irma. And when I think about the IRRMA, or whatever the acronym is that Medicare applies to their what is essentially means-tested premium for Medicare, a lot of people are not aware that if you have a certain amount of income, I believe it's over $209,000 of joint adjusted gross income in retirement, that you're going to pay more for your Medicare premium. And can be a sizable amount more if you have over $500,000 a year in income. So those all kind of come into play, not just where should I take this money from, or should I take this account and defer it long term. Thinking about it from a tax standpoint and a sequence of return standpoint, Scott, I think makes all the difference in the world. Now, let's talk a little bit about how, if you don't have a Roth IRA, how you might actually get to a better place. Maybe you're 10 years out from retirement and you've got a lot of qualified money. You might begin to start doing some Roth conversions. And you do that in bite-sized pieces that don't get you into a higher tax bracket now, and that could create a pool of tax-free income that you'd like to have in retirement.
Yeah, I believe in having Roth IRA money early, middle, and late. You can never have enough Roth IRA money. You always want Roth dollars because of the versatility and the flexibility of their usage, as John's already talked about. They can help keep your taxable income low. They can help you pull lump sums out for major purchases. Maybe you have to buy a new car. Maybe you just want to go on a trip. You don't have to worry about that withdrawal counting against your taxable income. So it's always a good idea to have Roth dollars and not just position them for the last bucket, if you will, the last place that you're going to take them from. Those conversions, again, need to be done carefully, though, too. We just had actually some new clients come in, and that was really top of mind for them. They were aware, John, of the possible IRMA that would be in play for them because of their income, not now, but later in their retirement. This gentleman has a very large pension that's going to continue to increase, so they're going to have to be receiving more income, a little bit out of their control. Nice problem to have, but they were thinking about that Medicare premium. But we had to do an analysis to take a look at where they already are and if withdrawing traditional or converting traditional IRA dollars into Roth made sense, because you do have to pay taxes at the moment of those or in the year that those dollars are converted. And if you don't watch it, you could be paying more on the conversion than you would when you actually withdrew it from a traditional IRA.
And you want to do those conversions prior to being on Medicare, because those conversions can bump you up and cause you to pay IRMA, the very thing that you're trying to avoid by doing that conversion. So these things can be tedious without question. They can be really, really hard to deal with, and that is why a relationship with a financial advisor is so important. The financial advisor kind of lives in these weeds, so to speak. It's not something that the average guy, really sits down and thinks about and coordinates all of this and understands how it all the details work. But discussing the benefits with your advisor can potentially get you to a lower taxable income. But again, it has to be done very carefully and with the entire picture, not just focused on, hey, can I get some Roth conversions going? You have to think about the consequences of those conversions along the way.
Hope that helped, Britt. If you've got questions for the Get Ready for the Future show, call or text them to us to 501-381-5228. We'll get your question on the air, just like we're doing for Greg. He sent this in via email, and it's our final question on the show today. My wife and I have 2 children. Our kids are nearing college age, and I'm not sure whether to cut back on retirement contributions to fund education. What should we do? So another question here about potentially cutting back on retirement contributions, which we talked about in a previous question, in lieu of to create the ability to pay down a mortgage. This question is more about making retirement or making contributions to an education fund. Let me tell you, I know about paying for college, okay? I've got 2 in college right now, about to have a third just in the next few days. It can be expensive. You don't want to really laden your kids with that debt if at all possible. And I understand how much a parent's love for their children will make them want to not have to make them take out a student loan. They'd love to pay for that college, and it's probably not very likely that you're going to cash flow it, right? Especially if you have multiple kids getting into college at the same time. Scholarships can help, but they may not make all the difference. But I want to caution Greg from considering about taking retirement or drawing back rather on retirement contributions in order to do this. So I've got a friend who has 2 daughters, one junior in college and one senior in high school. The junior in college is going to cost them $12,000 per semester for college tuition, room, and board. Let that sink in.
Yeah.
And this is an in-state school, by the way. Now, they're trying to figure out how to pay for that, right? The daughter has been in college for 2 years, about to begin the 3rd year, and they've got one about to come in right behind her, so they're going to have 2 in there at the same time. So you have to really think about how can you help without hurting your retirement. So, John, I think the thing I think about first is if you say to somebody, and this is our belief, that you should make sure you're on track for your own financial independence before helping out your children. I think it can sound like, well, that's pretty selfish, right? That's not a very sacrificial thing to do. But if you play that out, It actually is, because if you don't take care of yourself and you're not financially independent and can't pay your bills in retirement, who's going to be doing that?
Scott, there is no do-over on retirement. There's no student loan program, no bailout, no nothing for retirement. It's on you. And the only thing that really the government has for you is a Social Security check, and you know you can't live on that. So let's talk through this for just a second. I have a question. You're more in tune with this than I am. Is the word work during college like you just don't do it anymore? I don't know if I see a lot of people gainfully employed and going to college at the same time. Is it just too hard, or what's the situation?
I think some of that might depend on what you're studying.
Okay.
As a radio and TV major, I can tell you I worked just fine during school and had no problem making the making
real
the grades.
Taxing on the brain cells, right?
Exactly. So I think that might depend, right? And it might depend year to year, because at some point they may have to do some shadowing, they may have to do some interning, and they're not going to pay for that. But yes, and schools offer that, right?
Yes.
Schools offer some work programs that allow you work study programs that allow you to pay some tuition that way too. So there are other outlets, to your point.
Well, and I think that here's the bottom line. You may not want to have your kids take out a student loan. And I understand that thought process. But that student loan can be the savior of your retirement program if you think about it. Now, the kid may not necessarily have to pay that student loan. You may pay it yourself, but you have to think about, just like if you go out and get on an airplane. Scott, we're going to be traveling a little bit later on in the week. If you think about the thing that they will tell you at the airplane, on the airplane, is that if the mask drops down, put your mask on first before you help the person next to you. Why? Because that person may not know how to do it, and you can't help them if you're out of oxygen.
Yeah.
And so I think the same thing kind of applies here. I think you have to know whether you're on track for financial independence. And if you are, then okay, that may be a completely different conversation. But if you're not, do not sacrifice your financial independence for the benefit of your kids' college education.
So here are the action steps for you, Greg. Ideally, you could potentially do both, but you won't know until you create a retirement plan first. See what cutting back on your contributions would do to your retirement. What kind of impact would it have on your retirement income? So there potentially could be money there to help fund college if you're on track for your retirement. And it's never too late to look to things like a 529 plan. Those are college savings plans. You can set them up through a website here in the state of Arkansas. It's tax deductible to make those contributions on a state income tax level. You can do that while your kids are still young. You can do that while they're in their teenage years. You can even do it while they're in college, because you can make that contribution, put it into a savings account that earns some interest, and then take it right back out to pay for tuition and still get the college or the tax deduction for that. So I think there are options, but again, you have to answer those questions first. Are you on track for your own retirement? And one more comment to that too. When I was talking about my friend that has 2 kids, if you do go all in and try to pay for all of your kids' college expenses and you have more than one, ideally you're going to want to do for the second and the third and the fourth what you did for the first, right? So just think about where that snowballs to as well. So I think the reality here is there are ways to help your kids, but don't do it to the detriment of your own retirement. And that's going to be it. The final bell sounds. So it's time for our final thoughts. John, we'll start with you.
Well, Scott, as I kind of think about the questions that have come in today, there's a lot of bobbing and weaving going on. A lot of people are feeling the effects of inflation. We didn't even talk about the effects of inflation on college education because inflation in college has actually been way higher than regular inflation. But here's the situation that I think you've got to steel yourself toward. Financial independence is your number one priority for you. No one is going to be more interested in your financial well-being than you. Your kids have a lot of time. They have a lot of opportunity to make up for any student loan debt that they may come off with. They actually could build a lot of character by working and things of that nature. There's a lot here when you start thinking about, should I stop contributing to my plan for financial independence to pay off my mortgage or send kids to college or take care of elderly parents or whatever the case may be. Financial independence is something you get one shot at. And I think it is so critical that you ice that down first in order for you to be able to continue on and help other people along the way once you are financially independent.
Yeah, my final thought, John, you said something earlier about not making financial decisions based on your emotion.
Yes.
You know, there's a feel-good decision and then there's the financial decision. And sometimes they might be the same thing, but they're not always. And so if you're really looking for financial independence, you want to make sure you know what the right financial decision is. It may not always be right, but it's always probably going to be the better financial decision that could impact your future in a greater way than making a decision based on feelings. And the best way to do that is to work with a financial advisor who brings an objective viewpoint to the table. And I would encourage everyone listening to do that. That's all the time we have for this week's show. Thank you for watching. Love the questions this week. We hope you get them to us for next week as well. You can do that by calling or texting to 501-381-5228. Have a great week. We'll talk to you again next time.
The GenWealth Financial Team is available to you 24/7 at info@getreadyforthefuture.com or call our offices at 866-653-PLAN. That's 866-653-7526. You should personally consult a financial advisor before making any investment, and no strategy can assure success. Securities offered through LPL Financial. Member FINRA SIPC. Investment advice offered through Independent Advisor Alliance. Independent Advisor Alliance and GenWealth Financial Advisors are separate entities from LPL Financial.